Hello and welcome to course module number 1. In this module, we will provide a high-level introduction to user experience, or UX, followed by a more in-depth presentation of user experience research, UXR, and its subfields in the private sector.
There are hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions of what exactly user experience or UX is. For the sake of brevity, as well as our introduction into user experience, we're going to take a rather broad and generalizable definition so that we can talk about the high-level commonality between the different subdisciplines within user experience. And we will be going into more depth about these subdisciplines of user experience in the following slides. So for this course series, we're going to define user experience as follows. User experience can be described as the intentional crafting of a product, place, or experience to elicit a desired type of engagement and reaction in a person. In this definition, you'll notice that we've called out 3 different applications for user experience. They included product, places, and experiences. This is because user experience is not solely focused on physical form factors like a product or a tangible object, but is often also applied to virtual environments such as websites or mobile applications, in addition to operating systems. You can also find user experience professionals working in virtual and non-virtual sense of spaces and placeness. So that might include such things as wayfinding in a park or a zoo, as well as the sense of placeness that a video game environment might invoke in its users. Within UX, you'll commonly find that there are 5 or 6 subdisciplines, all defined by their mutual focus on the end user of a product, service, or experience. They include UX design, UX writing, UX research, UX management, and UX program management. There is variability in which of these subdisciplines or how many of these subdisciplines any given company or institution might have represented in its UX organizations. This has a lot to do with both the organizational maturity of that company as well as the history of employing UX professionals to aid in user-related interactions and experiences. An example of this might be the presence or absence of a 6th type of UX subdiscipline, which is UX engineering. This is the least common type to find within any given institution, as it's more commonly placed within the family of engineers as front-end engineering. Another UX subdiscipline among the ones we've listed that is less commonly found is also that of UX writing. And as I mentioned, we'll be going into more detail in the following slides.
By far the most familiar of UX subdisciplines, UX design is focused on the look, the feel, the logic, and emotive gravity of a product to ensure a user's engagement with it is functional and satisfying. The field of UX design continuously evolves to keep pace with broader contextual and technological changes. Depending on the modality the designer works in, a series of specializations of UX design have emerged, such as interactive designer, product designer, voice user interface designer, graphical user interface designer, and UX engineers.
Unlike UX design, UX writing is a much less common subfield of user experience to find within any given company. In part, it's because UX writing is relatively new in comparison with UX design or UX research. But additionally, it's far less understood in terms of what it can bring to the table in terms of a user's experience and engagement with any given product, whether it be a physical form factor or a user interface such as a website or web application. The term or title for this subfield, UX writer, does do a bit of a disservice to the complex nature of the work that these professionals perform. UX writing evokes this concept that there's a sole focus on textual content or perhaps translation, But in reality, UX writers are heavily involved in the cultural semantics of any given piece of symbolic content, including not only words, but also prose and even iconography. UX writers are also heavily involved in information architecture. This is the ordering in which information appears and the depth of detail provided at any given point in a user's engagement with a product or service. And finally, UX writers can also be known to be involved in the spatial and auditory presentation of symbolic content in a user's journey with a product or a service. More recently, UX writers have increasingly been referred to as UX content strategists. This is in part a gesture to the broader and more complex nature of UX writers' work beyond the text that appears on the screen, for example. It's also a facet of some of the emerging technological fields that UX writers have found their skill set transferable to. An example of this is smart devices that require voice-based interaction. So think of Alexa as well as Google Assistant. A type of UX writers or UX content strategists that work on these types of interactions are known as voice user interface designers, or alternatively, conversational designers, depending on whether or not it is, say, a voice first interaction or a chatbot based textual interaction. This is another area that UX writers have increasingly been growing as a subfield within user experience.
UX management is similar to other people management roles, except it's focused on the individual and team needs of UXers. Depending on the organizational maturity of UX at the company, you may find a mixed bag of UX subdisciplines being managed by the same UX manager, regardless of that manager's respective area of UX expertise. For example, the manager may have been a UX designer, but now oversees a cross-functional UX team of researchers, writers, engineers, and designers. The more mature UX is within a company, the more likely you are to find a UX researcher managing UX researchers, a UX writer managing UX writers, and a UX designer managing designers. Because of professional development bottlenecks at higher levels, an individual contributor, an IC, may transition to a management role in order to continue to scale and grow within a company. UX program management develops processes and practices to streamline UX work. For example, develop systems for tracking impact or build participant recruitment pipelines to expedite the launch of research projects. Companies with more mature UX teams might leverage a UX program manager to help set up and run a UX lab for usability related testing. It's not common to find UX program management, as they are arguably the rarest of subdisciplines within UX.
User experience research, sometimes simply referred to as user research or UX research, is really about translation. Your role and responsibility is to bridge between two worlds. On the one side, you have your product team, such as your product managers, engineers, who have a very particular objective in building out a product, designing that product, as well as set of assumptions about how that product is going to fit into the everyday life of their users and how it's going to fulfill some sort of need or bring about delight. The issue is that oftentimes this perception or this objective is not necessarily conducive with an end user's lived reality, experiences, needs, and desires. Your role as a researcher, a UX researcher, is to bring these two worlds together and make sure that the product team is building out a product intended for an end user whose everyday life and needs are known to the product team. Within UX research, there are three subfields. They include qualitative user research, quantitative user research, and design research. In this module, we aren't going to go into any kind of incredible depth about these different subfields. We will, however, talk more about the different methods and analytical techniques leveraged by these subfields in Module 2.
Qualitative user researchers leverage a range of specialized methods and analytical techniques to collect, organize, and analyze qualitative data. This qualitative data consists of what people say, do, and think, as well as the associated value systems, cultural meanings, and emotional import of them. Qualitative user researchers often work at smaller scales in comparison with quantitative user researchers, as they focus on answering the question of why and so what. Many of the methods and analytical techniques used in qualitative user research will feel familiar if you're coming from a social, behavioral, or psychological science.
Compared with qualitative researchers, quantitative user researchers work with much larger data sets, ranging anywhere from hundreds to tens of thousands of data points. On these data sets, they perform often statistical analysis to identify significant relationships or patterns in the user data. The data itself can derive from user surveys intended to assess user sentiment or draw characteristics and demographics from the user population, even poll user opinion about a product experience. User experience researchers can also draw quantitative data points and metrics from behavioral metrics and record logs, allowing them to also correlate these data sets with the survey data from user populations. Quantitative UX researchers tend to come from master's or PhD programs in psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and even information science.
Design researchers often work closest with UX designers to develop and improve upon particular designs. Together, designers and design researchers will run a series of tests with research participants to assess if the product is easy to use and understand, if it elicits satisfaction, even joy, or serves an important function for the user. Based on the design researcher's findings, the design might be tweaked and iterated on to get the desired result. Design research is often the default view of UXR that most people will expect and assume from a UX researcher. However, conflating all of UX research with design research actually does a disservice to those that specialize in design research methods, analysis, and deliverables. Again, the fine-tuning and crafting of a product experience relies on the close collaboration of a design researcher with developers and designers prior to launch and shortly after.
The biggest anxiety that job recruiters and hiring managers have when they encounter a job candidate fresh out of graduate school or newly transitioning from academia to the private sector is that they're not going to be able to adapt to the fast-paced and collaborative work environment typical of the private sector. They have this preconception that academics know only how to work alone in long-term large projects and are unable to adapt or be flexible to any kind of change. But for all their fixation on time, it's actually a fixation on the legibility of time. What we mean by this is that the private sector loves a good research plan that organizes time into discrete increments during which certain milestones or certain deliverables will be accomplished. Examples that you'll commonly hear within the private sector of this incremental breakout of time include timelines, roadmaps, time to completion, time to launch, time to delivery, time on task, life cycles, benchmarks, and so on and so forth.
So what this all means is that you'll need to learn to communicate about your research in terms of time a lot more than you might be accustomed to. This includes breaking out the different phases of your research into a type of temporal phenomenon. This provides a sense of rapidity that can be expressed even over a long-term project simply by breaking it down into smaller projects with shorter timelines at the end of which you deliver something, whether that be some sort of material artifact like a report or the ticking off of some form of milestone. Again, this conveys a sense of progress as well as evidence of the work that you're doing to your stakeholders within the private sector. So even if it overall takes the same period of time, it does provide that sense of accomplishment. Within UX research itself, there are also an implicit set of timeframes that various research methods are commonly associated. For example, 2 weeks to a month research approaches are often considered to be agile. They might also be referred to as design sprints or rapid research. Projects that fall within 3 months to a 6 months period will often be considered exploratory research, which is really emphasizing a broad sketch of a problem space, including knowns and unknowns and areas for further investment. You'll also find projects that are 6 months or more, referred to as foundational or ethnographic research. This is focused on identifying entirely new needs and opportunities for thematic product development based on the user insights. Often, prior exploratory research will have sketched out or scoped out this problem space that the foundational research or ethnographic research will explore in more detail. Research that extends beyond a year is often classified as longitudinal research. This type of work requires checking back in with a user population to understand if there have been any shifts or changes in user perception, behavior, or needs. You'll also find projects that extend well beyond even 3 years. These might include such things as benchmark studies, which are focused on continuously over a certain set increments of time, such as quarterly or annually, reassessing a set of questions and topics with the sample population to again see if there's been shifts in such things as user sentiment towards a website or a product.
Communication and collaboration, particularly with coworkers from other disciplines or professions, are an essential and operative component of working in the private sector as a UX researcher and will be something that job recruiters and hiring managers look for in their job candidates. This is no longer an individual sport, but a team sport, often with players that don't understand your job role and your function on the team. To this end, it's important to learn and speak in the language of your audience and team members so as to be an effective communicator of research needs and findings. As a new hire, this will mean taking some time to do an intentional participant observation of the workplace, turning your researcher's gaze inwards on the very team culture you're a part of so that you can indeed successfully blend in and thrive. How do people communicate in the private sector? There's often a very prescribed and templated set of documentation and presentations with special acronyms like PRD, a product requirement document, PRFAQ, press release, frequently asked questions, vision and strategy, design doc, product brief, etc. It's not hard to learn these and to creatively adapt them for user research needs, bridging communication gaps while facilitating research-specific needs for authoring and sharing out insights. At the beginning of this module, we compared UX researchers to translators, whose primary function is bridging gaps. Now at the end, we've come full circle to emphasize that UX researchers must act as the go-between for two different worlds of thinking and doing, to build bridges that connect users' experience with the company's products and their overarching business, marketing, design, and engineering goals.
You've completed Module 1. Congratulations! You're now ready to start Module 2. Just kidding. We'll first provide a recap and then you can start Module 2. So in this module, we've offered you a high-level introduction to user experience. We defined it as the intentional crafting of a product, place, or experience to elicit the desired type of user engagement and reaction. We also touched on the 5 sub-disciplines within UX. This included UX design, that works on the look, feel, and emotional effect of a product, UX writing, now often referred to as UX content strategy, which focuses on the communication of knowledge and information through various content forms such as text, imagery, as well as sound. We also introduced UX management and UX program management. These subject matter experts are responsible for coordinating and overseeing the various processes and systems deployed by the cross-functional UX teams within a company. We also introduced UX research, which we described as having the main job of translating between two worlds. Namely, this materializes as translating research data into usable insights to help improve the user's experience and meet company goals. Within UX research, there are three different subfields: qualitative researchers, which delve into the why and so what for deeper meaning; quantitative researchers who use large data sets to identify significant relationships or patterns in user data; and finally, design researchers who work very closely with UX designers to test and iterate on product prototypes and arrive at user-centric deliverables. In Module 1, we also stressed how in the private sector, there's great emphasis on time, specifically the legibility of time. It becomes important for you to deconstruct monolithic projects such as your dissertation or academic research into discrete units of time where milestones and deliverables are attained. In UX research, there are also time-based naming conventions that we touched on. These include 2-week design sprints, 3-month exploratory research projects, 6+ months investment in foundational or ethnographic research, and the year-plus longitudinal studies and recurring benchmark studies. And finally, capping off Module 1, we impressed upon you the importance of communication and collaboration, namely learning the language that your audience and team members are accustomed to, as you're expected to be that bridge that connects user experience data with your company's goals. It's all the more important that you're able to speak in the language of those that you're trying to convince and work with.